Our first talk in the session is by Kevin. He's going to talk about rethinking realistic adversaries for anonymous communication systems. Take it away.
Hello, everybody. Can you all hear me fine? Yes? Cool. Excellent. So yeah, I'm going to be talking a little bit about rethinking realistic adversaries for anonymous communication systems, taking in mind some things that are not necessarily modeled in a lot of the adversary models that exist out there, and thinking about how we can expand these models to include more details that we have learned over the past 10 or so years. So a little bit of background that I think really doesn't need to be here for this audience, but you know, I got to give you an opportunity to sleep a little bit before I get into the interesting content, so I'll do just that. So anonymity systems are systems that are interested in the unlinkability of communications, specifically with respect to an adversary. Obviously, it doesn't make sense to just say linkability without trying to break that linkability for a specific person. And it can't be for everyone because the client is at least going to know who they're, potentially going to know who they're communicating with, right? So whenever we talk about anonymity, whenever we talk about linkability, we are talking with respect to some adversary. And these adversaries have properties. Generally, the properties that they tend to have fall into a few buckets, which is a global adversary versus a non-global adversary. So an adversary that can see literally all of the conditions of the network and every single packet that is flying through it, maybe can't read the contents of those packets, but can certainly observe them no matter where they lie, as long as they're not in an intermediary machine, right? As long as they're on the network itself. And then we have the non-global adversary, which can only see portions of the network, not everything. And then we have active versus passive. So active adversaries are adversaries that are capable of actually manipulating the traffic as it crosses the web. So this could be delaying, dropping, injecting, modifying packets that are on the network. And then passive adversaries are adversaries that are not capable, or for whatever other reason, do not perform these actions. Okay, so I see a lot of I already knew that, so I'm going to continue on to the next slide. So when we look at anonymity systems as they exist in the literature, there are a small set of frequently considered adversaries. I put some quotes from different papers up here so that this way we can see that these adversaries tend to pop up over and over again. So Lupix considers a global adversary. It tries to use cover traffic and, I don't know how to say this, I'm very sorry, I guess it's Poisson mixing, to provide anonymity and to achieve traffic analysis resistance against a global network adversary. NIM also tries to defend against global adversaries. We have Riffle, which I think probably, I tried reading through this paper a few times to find the adversary statement, and what I could find most easily was to be fully traffic analysis resistant, which I admit maybe is a subjective decision of mine, but I chose that to mean global. We have Groove, which also is talking about global active adversaries, CMIX, global, etc. However, this is not the only assumption that exists for adversaries. There exists all the way on the other end of the spectrum non-global adversaries that are much, much closer to what I think we could understand as real adversaries. And why do I say that? Why do I say that a global adversary is probably not real? Well, there are many different factors that make it such that being able to see literally everything on the internet is going to be impossible. A lot of them being geopolitical factors. I somehow doubt that the United States is going to be able to see every single packet that exists within China and vice versa. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe one of these countries has an incredibly advanced spying capability, but I don't think that there's any system that could see every packet that exists globally. Anonymity systems do exist on a smaller scale than the global internet generally, but even so, they tend to be geographically dispersed in a way that very rarely can an adversary see everything and every participant in the system. So we have to consider an adversary that's maybe not as strong as global. And so we have some examples of adversaries that are not global. They're local. So in the onion routing paper, we have the phrase, the sentence, we assume roving attackers that can monitor part but not all of the network at a time. And we have Tor, which assumes that an adversary can observe some fraction of network traffic and can actively participate in it, modifying, generating, deleting, delaying, etc. And can even participate by running a router of their own. While this is a lot more realistic, there are details missing, right? What fraction of the network are they assumed to be able to see? How do they decide where they are roaming to? What portions can they see at a given time? These are all variables, and there have been works that address these different things, but from what I've seen in the anonymity literature, when new anonymity systems are introduced, these previous works that do address some of these more concrete things are not considered. So the contributions of this talk and small 4-page paper, at least from the way that I see it, are twofold. We were kind of torn about whether or not this was a position paper or work in progress paper, and I think it kind of shows a little bit on the paper itself. And the way that I see it is that we have contributions in both of these areas. We provide a little bit of a position stating that works need to start using some of these more realistic and specific adversary models instead of the global adversary models. We argue that that the existing adversary models that are realistic need to be expanded to include more factors. And then we have a work in progress portion where we describe what those factors might be and what some of the complications might be, with an intention of doing more research to follow up on this and deem what is realistic and what is not. So for the work in progress, we propose that adversaries are comprised of different spheres of influence, is what we call it, and I'll define that term a little bit later. And then we also state that adversaries have limitations, which is not surprising. Yet, at the same time, when we look at all of the new anonymity works that consider global passive and global active adversaries, this fact seems to be tossed by the wayside in favor of building the most robust system that could be built, perhaps at the expense of things like usability and deployability that could cause it to not be as heavily used as a real system. So we are not the first people to work on this by a long shot. There have been a lot of works that have looked at realistic adversary limitations. There are 2 papers here, the Location Diversity and Anonymity Networks and AS Awareness in Tor Path Selection, where there were studies that took a look at an autonomous system level to see where autonomous systems were popping up inside anonymity systems. The second paper exclusively on Tor, and the first paper looking at Tor and some other anonymity systems. And both papers concluding that there, at least at the times that these studies were done, that there was a high probability of, or a higher than comfortable probability that a single AS would show up perhaps multiple times inside a circuit for a given client. But these works do have limitations, and the limitations really have to do with the time in which they were published. This was all pre-2013, when we thought the world was very different than what we understand it is now. So some of these limitations are assumptions such that separate anonymous systems would not collude with each other in order to de-anonymize clients, and that law enforcement agencies would not be willing to face accountability for illegally accessing data. That didn't hold up so well as times went on. So even now, almost every year, like clockwork, there's almost the same headline that comes out. FBI caught illegally abusing the NSA collected data almost every year. I think 2022 is missing, but this is I think it's 2021, 2019, and 2023 are all reflected here. And then we do have some understanding that even maybe it's because of the way that the business models work, or maybe it's actually different companies colluding with each other. But this is a large quote of text. Don't worry about reading it. There's a lot there. Read it if you'd like. But there's one portion of it here that says the NSA values AT&T not only because it has access to information that transits the nation, but also because it maintains unique relationships with other phone and internet providers, showing that there is some relationship between them that I think in the anonymity world we would consider collusion, given that the NSA finds it incredibly useful to have access to this data from other companies through AT&T. So later, and much later, I don't remember the year exactly, there was another paper, 20,000 in League Under the Sea, Anonymous Communication, Trust, MLATs, and Undersea Cables, that presented an ontology of anonymous systems adversaries that was a lot more in-depth than the previous work had showed. And it included things like legal jurisdiction. It also included autonomous systems, physical locations, even down to software version information and relay family. And it has some room for costs, a budget in order for an adversary to compromise a larger portion of the network, et cetera, and effectiveness, the probability of compromise, and a lot more that I wish I had time to discuss because I was very excited the first time that I read this paper and the second time, and even still the third time. So there's a lot here, but even so there are limitations. There's always limitations to every piece of work. And part of the idea is that the cost was kind of collapsed to a single variable, and it was kind of implied, though not explicitly stated, that the cost was almost exclusively monetary in what was being considered. There were some details lacking in the capabilities of adversaries at a given point. So once an adversary was compromised, it was compromised, and that was that. They had complete control, at least that was my understanding when I had read it. And it doesn't consider concurrent or competing adversaries. It kind of, as far as I remember, considers an ontology to build an adversary that the user is worried about. And this may cause issues in the real world when we have multiple competing adversaries who are unaware of each other. So we proposed a little bit of future work, right, in order to address each of these things. The first is to expand the ontology from the 20,000 in League Under the Sea paper to build in a more specific definition of budgets and concepts of a sphere of influence. So, oh, good. It shows up better on the projector than it does on my laptop. So excuse me while I look away from you and look at my own slide for a second. So the idea here is that an adversary can really have three types of influence over some portion of the network infrastructure. It could be no influence, indirect influence, or direct influence. Indirect influence is something where the data has already been collected. The adversary can't affect the data, but what they can do is ask for it via a court order. But at that point, they also inherit whatever limitations the company that they are ordering with the court has. For example, in data retention. If that organization has a data retention limit, and that data has been deleted, no court order is going to bring that data back. It's gone, right? But it's very, very different for direct influence, which is, I said here only cyber attack, but there's like many ways that direct influence can occur. Cyber attack being one of them, other being the installation of devices on network backbones. Even court orders can compel an organization to do some form of active attack. So there are multiple ways to transition into the direct influence. And one of the important things to notice is that each of these transitions from court order or a cyber attack or any of these things have a cost, right? And that could be in time, it could be in money, it could be a great variety of things. Political capital is also a cost, right? After this, we also would like to study adversary limitations. So one of the ideas here is that we would like to run an experiment to see what happens with concurrent adversaries who are attempting to use active techniques at the same time. Can these watermarks confuse each other to the point that it can no longer be detected on the other end? Maybe. Maybe not. There may be watermarking schemes that are resistant to this and other watermarking schemes that are totally ruined by the injection of another watermarking scheme. So we're intending, we haven't had time to yet, but we are intending to study this with deployments of different attacks and seeing what the impact of these are. And then finally, we would like to do a case study where we actually, after expanding the ontology, try to do a little bit of a instantiation of it, right? In using real-world data that we can get from leaked documents, but also from things like the Freedom of Information Act, especially in the area of cost. Every single time that there is a FISA warrant, they have to go to the FISA court. The FISA court will have a cost in hiring lawyers and in fees, all of these different things. And these things might actually be obtainable by a Freedom of Information Act. If we're just looking at costs, I'm not sure. I'm not a legal expert. But I would like to try at least and see what information we could get in order to try to understand what the cost of some of these attacks are, so that this way we can do specific instantiations of these ontologies. I would not limit it to the US. In fact, I was having a conversation over lunch about why just the US, and my answer was, well, availability of data. So I would like to expand it to other things, maybe using qualitative methods like interviews with people who do know a little bit more about this from an not inside perspective, because that would be them violating the law, but like who understand more from more observations than I currently have. We'd love to hear any feedback that you have for us, especially since this is very, very, very early on in the process of this work. And really it can move directions pretty drastically, as there's, at this point, just the theoretical aspect of it done, with any implementations only starting. So thank you very much. Please let me know if there are any questions. And here are all the references for the papers that I discussed in the talk.
Do we have any questions? Okay, yes. Roy.
Hi.
Hello.
Are you considering dissemination of differential dissemination of knowledge in your modeling from the perspective of the adversary, and also like assuming that they are able to communicate either to inner departments, because I guess we are talking about nation states, but I would guess you have to consider for export or sharing of knowledge in areas of influence, aka Russia, China, whatever. And my other question is, I do see the cost, but what are you thinking for the fitness function? Evolutive landscape.
Yeah. No, these are good questions. I'll answer the second one first, and then I'll answer the first one, because I have a feeling it's easier to answer your second question, in that I haven't considered it yet, and these are things that I'm moving towards. If you have any ideas, I'd love to talk about it. In terms of your first question, yes, there is some attempt that we have in order to try to consider the costs between talking with each other, though I expect that they're not very much, given that here we have the X-Keyscore program, which is a large database built by the NSA based on all of their data collection. And some of the things that we see here is that the FBI, which is not meant to have access to this, just does have unfiltered access in order to perform queries directly, at least if the media that's reporting on this is to be believed. So yes, I do want to model the cost there, but I can't imagine that is the aspect of the cost that is very high, given what we know. Yeah. I hope that answered the question. If not, we could, I know, half-half. We can talk afterwards if you'd like.
Is there a question in the back? Okay, I'll ask this and then I'll come back. So there's a question online.
Sure.
Question online. What do you mean by competing adversaries? Could you please describe one real-world example where there were competing adversaries? Yeah,
so this is a very good point and a weakness in the way that I'm presenting these slides, which is I cannot provide right now a concrete real-world example that I know of where there were competing adversaries. This part is certainly the most theoretical of everything that I presented so far, but I can define what I mean by it, right? Part of active adversaries, even if they can see a part or the whole aspect of the network, is that they can inject or modify or delay traffic to the point that they introduce a specific, very loud, very visible signature or watermark into the flow of traffic that they can then correlate more easily later down the pipeline. And the question that we were interested in looking at is, well, what happens if two adversaries are doing that for the same flow, but they are unaware that each other are doing that? Can these watermarks actually cancel each other out? Not cancel each other out, because they're not going to be able to speed up the packets, right? But can they actually impact their signatures so much that they both become undetectable, or one becomes undetectable, or both of them are somehow detectable when it comes out at the other side? So this is by far the most theoretical part of the work, person online who asked the question. So I cannot provide a concrete example of when this has worked, or has indeed occurred, especially given the secretive nature of traffic confirmation attacks in the wild as they exist. But it's a theoretical concern that we're interested in knowing about, and at least I think is interesting.
Thank you for the nice talk and the perspective of defining realistic adversaries. Mm-hmm. So I would like to extend your analysis and ask this question. Perfect. That with respect to realism, are you also interested in actually defining the capabilities of the sensor, not only their reach? So by that, what I mean is we have this, loosely defined term, traffic analysis, in which, everyone has a different understanding of to what extent we can go. So do you think you would want to, what are your thoughts on how can we define realistic adversaries in those capabilities sense? Thank you.
Okay, so the question was, in terms, I'm repeating because the people online don't have access to the audio here. So the question was along the lines of, have you considered the term realistic not just in what I've already presented, but also the capabilities of the adversary to do certain things, such as modify traffic, for example, right? Is that along the lines what you were thinking of? Yes. Okay, cool. So yes, I would like to cover this as well. I would like to, over time, try to study all of these different aspects of what realistic means, including what they can do and cannot do. I do think that there are limits into how much they can, for example, delay traffic without a packet just being seen as lost, and anomalies being detected in terms of how high the rate of packet loss is and things like that, which can be visible to a client eventually. And I do think that many adversaries probably don't want to get caught. I understand that there's very limited accountability in the case that they actually are, but generally, I believe that they don't want to be, because there's still the secretive advantage they have of people not knowing that they're attacking, right? So I do think that they would attempt to limit the amount of delay that they introduce, so that this way packets don't end up dropping. And they wouldn't want to drop packets at all if they can avoid it when doing things like watermarking and stuff like that. These are all things that I do intend on modeling, but this is still an early stage of the work. But to answer your question, yes.
Okay, thank you. There are a couple more questions online, but I'll let you go online and answer those.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'll do that as soon as I sit down. Thank you.
Let's thank the speaker again.